Parasite outbreak is spreading nationwide, and it made me think, could data centers be infecting and contaminating America's water supply? There have been recent reports in Forbes, Futurism, and even commentary from leading food scientists about the theory that the parasite is waterborne. So I spent hours researching and trying to connect the dots for you so we could learn what this could mean for all of us. You've heard about AI and things like ChatGPT. Well, all of it runs inside enormous windowless buildings called data centers, and those buildings drink millions of gallons of water every single day. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how the true story of one data center that leaked a rare and deadly germ right into the water a city sprays into its own parks that just happened a couple months ago. Whether that could really help spread this parasite, we simply don't know yet. And why these machines are quietly raising your electricity bill and, destroying our water supply. I'm going to talk about a couple of forgotten mysteries in London and in Philadelphia in the 1800s and 1900s that explain this water theory. By the end of this, you'll understand your own water and your own food better than almost anyone in your neighborhood, and you'll know exactly how to keep your family safe. And you can be the person who can warn the people you love. That last part is the most important, so please do one thing quickly right now. Share this with someone who drinks tap water and eats vegetables, which may be everyone that you care about. But first, a promise to you because that's the reason this channel exists. Part of what I'm about to show you is rock-solid documented facts. Part of it is an honest theory that no one has proven yet, and I'm going to tell you which part is which, and when we cross from one to the other. I'm Dr. Thomas, a Johns Hopkins and NIH-funded caregiving researcher and the CEO of Care Yaya. I've helped thousands of families navigate aging, dementia, and serious illness. I'm not a clinician, but a leading researcher and innovator in caregiving. So when a hidden risk like this lands in the water and the food of the exact people that I spent my life protecting, older adults, the frail, the immunocompromised, it lands squarely in my world, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it. So let's get into it. The place I'm going to take you to is Cheyenne, Wyoming. The company is called Goat Systems. It's an entity, a tech giant named Meta, which is the parent of Facebook and Instagram, is using to build a data center that's a campus roughly the size of 14 football fields. Now, before a giant data center facility like this switches on, crews perform a step with a very plain-sounding name: fill and flush. They fill the building's brand-new cooling pipes with water and then flush them to clear the construction grit and stuff surrounding it. Then the used water gets sent down the drain into the city's sewer system. It's just routine and boring, but until it wasn't, a few months ago in February, Cheyenne's water utility ran what they do all the time, a routine test for fecal contamination, and they found something in the water that they told reporters they'd never even looked for. The utility's engineering manager, Frank Strong, said this isn't something we even test for. What they caught was a bacterium called Cupriavitis gilardi. Sorry, I even had to learn how to pronounce this. Even infectious disease experts might pause. Of what is that? But here's why it matters. That Cupriavitis is a rare and resistant, infection to antibiotics. And it's the small number of human cases we have on record that we've seen. It's dangerous to a group of people. A peer-reviewed medical journal that was quoted in infectious disease reports looked at 32 known cases of this going back to 2009. 10 of those 32 people died. Think about that. It's a mortality rate of over 30%, and almost every serious case struck people whose immune systems were already down. People who were cancer patients, transplant patients, immunocompromised children. So that specific bug has a ridiculously strong danger and is a big threat to the vulnerable, but less risk to healthy people. But this is the part that turns that chemistry story into public health story. So Cheyenne, like many modern cities, is smart about water. Instead of wasting treated wastewater, it reclaims it, cleans it, and then reuses it to irrigate parks, golf courses, even public green spaces. I think it's efficient and responsible, but the official Frank Strong said something that was concerning. He said that the reuse system sprays water into aerosol onto the grass, and that increases the potential for health issues when there's a bacterium spreading. So when you miss water over a park, those tiny droplets drift into the air where people and children and grandparents, sitting on a bench, can breathe them in. So when they discovered this, they acted. They classified the data center's discharge as significant noncompliance. They totally revoked its water dumping privileges. They drained and disinfected the entire reuse system and even a public pond. And there was a reassuring fact. By late June, fallout tests at both reclamation facilities came back completely negative. No human being was known to have gotten sick from that. The system caught it and cleaned it. But there is an interesting detail here. The contamination was flagged and the discharge was shut off in March, but the public wasn't told until late June, about 3 months later. A member of Congress from Wyoming has since sent a formal letter to Meta's CEO demanding answers. So I'm not here to assign blame. I'm a caregiving researcher, not a lawyer or prosecutor. But I think that 3-month gap is a thread that ties this to everything else we're about to discuss, because the theme of this entire video is not one company or one villain, but it's a bigger, quieter problem. What happens when enormous new machines plug into the shared plumbing that our water and our health depends on, and the people watching that plumbing aren't told enough information or told too late, If you find this kind of deep dives helpful, please subscribe right now, because I don't think the news is connecting all these dots for us, and we need to know. Now, I know exactly what some of you are thinking, because you might have watched the last couple of videos that we've made on this. You're thinking, okay, Neil, is this the source of this Cyclospora outbreak happening right now? And, to be completely straight, no, there is zero evidence yet connecting any data center to the Cyclospora outbreak. So, the bug that was in Wyoming, the Cupria vitis, that's a bacterium, and it's a completely different creature from the Cyclospora that's spreading right now. That's a single-cell parasite, different organism, and different illnesses. So, I'm not saying the data centers are causing this outbreak, but there is something really interesting to think about here. Could they be propagating? So why are we here? Because that Wyoming story about the data center is what I'd call a proof of concept. It proves something that until this year people hadn't even thought about, that massive new facilities can inject an unexpected, dangerous organism into cities' shared water, and specifically into the reused water that we can spray on the ground, and elsewhere in the country is sprayed onto crops. So I think that Wyoming story is the smoke. The question worth asking calmly is whether that indicates there could be a fire. The theory that I'm labeling as preliminary hypothesis, not a finding, goes like this. The data center's water, issues aren't creating Cyclospora. That parasite can only come from human waste, but it's that our water system is increasingly being centralized and reused, and powerful new stress on that shared system, contamination event, a bypass, a treatment plant pushed past its limits, could become an amplifier that could help spread a pathogen like this faster and wider than it otherwise would. So it's not an origin, but it could be an accelerant. And to get into why that's plausible, we first can go into a couple of history lessons. And I think these are fascinating, Going back to the summer of 1854 in Soho, London, a neighborhood was dying. In roughly 10 days, more than 500 people are killed by a cholera epidemic. Violent, dehydrating, terrifying, and the reigning theory at the time was miasma. The idea that disease can just float in bad-smelling air. Everyone believed it. Well, everyone except a quiet physician named John Snow. Snow didn't accept that air theory, so he did something that nobody had thought to do. He grabbed a map, walked the streets, and marked every single death as a little bar on that map. As the bars piled up, a shape emerged to him. The deaths were tightly clustered around one single thing, a single public water pump on Broad Street. People who drank from that pump were just dying. People a few street over drinking from a different pump were fine. So, in 1854, Snow convinced the local authorities to do a small and radical thing: remove the handle from that pump on Broad Street. Just take the pump out of service. Immediately, the outbreak faded. I think I just love that history. You know the strong history here. Not a nice story. Snow did all of this before anyone even knew germs existed. The actual cholera bacterium wasn't even identified until decades later, so Snow couldn't even see the enemy. He just simply followed the water, thought about a pattern, and acted, and he's now called the father of epidemiology. And I think removing the pump handle is almost like a symbol of public health around the world. Now think about that lesson, and I think it's quite interesting that back in the 1850s, one contaminated shared water source seeded death across an entire community. Just one pump, and that's the worry, about our modern reclaimed water systems, the ones that are now being asked to absorb the largest new industrial water users in history. These data centers, when you pour everyone's water through the same pipe, a single failure doesn't stay local. It travels, and Snow proves. That with a map, so we'd be foolish to forget the lesson. If you love this kind of hidden history and the true stories behind today's headlines, that's what I love doing here. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. So, how thirsty are these data centers really? And this is where the numbers are just absolutely surprising, and it's really strong, well-documented data. According to the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, U.S. data centers directly drank about 17 billion gallons of water just for cooling, and that was 3 years ago in 2023. It's projected to double already by now and over the next couple of years. A single large evaporative-cooled facility can use 3 to 5 million gallons of water a day. Think about that. One data center building, millions of gallons a day. That's the entire water use of a small American town, except this town is a windowless warehouse full of computers. Why so much? Because these facilities run hot, and the cheapest way to cool them is to evaporate water. The same principle as sweat cooling your skin. That water then gets circulated warm again and again through cooling towers, and the biology that should make you lean in because it connects to our second history lesson. Warm, recirculating, nutrient-rich water is one of the best breeding grounds for dangerous bacteria that human engineering has ever built. That is a big risk in the system, and that brings us to a second history lesson in Philadelphia. In July 1976, America was just celebrating its 200-year birthday, and in Philly, the American Legion is holding its state convention at a grand old hotel called the Bellevue Stratford. Thousands of veterans and their families gather to celebrate. Then they start getting sick, a strange severe pneumonia, fever, cough, lungs filling up. Before it's over, about 182 people are ill. 29 are dead. For months, the smartest disease detectives in the country cannot figure out why. There was talk of a terrorist attack, of poison, of a new plague, and people were genuinely frightened. The break came a few months later when a scientist named Dr. Joseph McDade identified an entirely new bacterium. We named it after its victims, Legionella, and where had it been hiding, multiplying, and waiting? In the hotel's air conditioning cooling tower. The warm water in that cooling system had grown a colony of a lethal microbe, and the building's ventilation had, misted it into the air that the guests were breathing. The landmark study ran in the New England Journal of Medicine that year. The Bellevue Stratford, one of Philadelphia's finest hotels, closed its doors that November. It was basically killed by its own plumbing. So now connect the wires here. In 1976, a cooling tower turned warm water into an aerosol and killed 29 people, most of them older people. In 2026, a water utility manager in Wyoming looked at a data center's reclaimed water being sprayed as an aerosol into public parks, and said, literally, that, hey, this is going to cause health issues. You know that's 50 years apart, but the same mechanism, the same warm water, air assault, same vulnerable people. You know, history doesn't repeat, but I think it rhymes sometimes, and it might be trying to tell us something. And you know, I'd note that Legionnaire's disease cases in the U.S. have risen roughly fivefold since the year 2000. So you know that problem hasn't even gone away yet. So, this is the heart of the video because I've shown you kind of like the history that the theory stands on. But you know, I want to hold myself in these theories to a strict standard. So, you know, we still don't know yet about the contributors of data center and water usage to Cyclospora. But Cyclospora, you know, this specific parasite makes the thought experiment interesting and more than an idle worry. And strong evidence from CDC suggests that Cyclospora shrugs off chlorine. The agency's own guidance is it's unlikely to be killed or inactivated by routine chemical disinfection, and no EPA-registered disinfectant has been shown to reliably kill it. So the chlorine that we count on to keep our water safe for this parasite, it's not a speed bump, and you know evidence here also. Secondly, genuinely conflicts. The FDA has stated that ordinary wastewater treatment may inactivate Cyclospora, but evidence also suggests it can survive even treated wastewater, and there's not much conclusive data. USDA-funded researchers have confirmed the parasite is now endemic here in the U.S. and can be recovered from both wastewater and irrigation water. So think about that. It resists our main disinfectant, and it may survive the very treatment steps that we rely on. It's not proof of anything, but I think it's a reason to pay attention. Now assemble the chain here. You know, human waste carrying this parasite enters the wastewater system. We know that's how Cyclospora works. The water gets treated, but chlorine doesn't finish the job. Full removal isn't guaranteed. The reclaimed water gets sprayed into crops onto our landscape, or the parasite can persist, you know, in the environment long enough to sporulate and become infectious over 1 to 2 weeks. And this same centralized reused water system, we are now plugging the thirstiest industrial machines ever built these data centers. At a moment when we have just learned in Wyoming that a single facility can inject unexpected pathogens all over the town, and the public may not even hear about it for months. So this is to me very concerning, very scary. There's no evidence yet that data centers can spread Cyclospora, but there is an emerging theory about how our shared water systems could, in principle, accelerate the spread of a water-important bug. And as soon as we find real evidence, you'll hear it from me first. You know, but the reason I'm raising all this is the same reason that I think Jon Snow grabbed a map. You know, 200 years ago. Sometimes you have to think about the pattern before you can prove the mechanism, and sometimes people pay a price for waiting, and it's always the same: the older, the sick, the young, and the vulnerable that we care for. So I think we need to be very vigilant here, and the water story is just one room here in like a larger house, you know? And I'm talking about data centers here. Why does the United States have roughly 40% of the entire world's data centers? It's the artificial intelligence boom. Every chatbot answer, every AI image, every automated tool running all over the country runs inside these buildings. And because America built the industry, we host the hardware. So you know, by some measures, we hold close to half of the world's computing capacity on this. One region alone, Northern Virginia, is nicknamed the Data Center Alley. It contains something like 14% of all the data centers on the planet, from what I read somewhere. And that concentration lands on real people, in real towns, with real consequences, even beyond water. You know, think about your electricity bill. You know, there's no partisan spin here. That hits families of every political stripe. You know, the independent monitor that watches the largest U.S. power grid, which serves the Mid-Atlantic and Midwest, found that data centers were responsible for 63% of a recent jump in electricity prices, about $9 billion in extra costs that are passed along to regular people. In early 2026, wholesale power in that region ran roughly 76% higher than just 1 year before. And that monitor said plainly that the impact on customers was very large and not reversible. In some areas, households are seeing significant increases in their electricity prices. This is contested. One study at Rutgers found, no robust hit to residential bills, but that was through 2024. And sometimes also there's political claims that 200% increase. Many fact-checkers have disputed that, but I think that data centers are putting real rising pressure on the electrical grid and on prices, and reasonable people are still arguing about exactly how much, that is going to cost us. So I think that's a real legitimate question. These facilities run 24 hours a day, and they're also creating a tremendous amount of noise. Their cooling equipment produces a constant low-frequency hum. In Northern Virginia, residents have measured sound at the edge of their properties in a range that EPA associates with trouble sleeping. In Chandler, Arizona, a neighborhood fought for nearly several years before a city finally required sound studies before new construction. So, for many people, a chronic noise isn't just annoying. Disrupted sleep and constant low-grade stress are associated with higher blood pressure and cardiovascular strain. So I think those complaints are real legit, and the health risk is enough to be taken seriously. And then beyond that, there's the air. When a data center needs backup power, it often burns diesel or gas. Some are even firing up turbines faster than the permits can keep up. In Memphis recently, a facility running gas turbines has drawn a Clean Air Act lawsuit from major environmental law groups. And again, these are interesting observations. There's no verdict yet, but I think emissions that are happening right next to where people live are associated with respiratory and heart problems that sometimes can hit older adults the hardest. So I think if you ask people in these communities that are living next to them, it's not hypothetical. People have found $130 billion in data center projects recently were blocked or delayed by local opposition. So the number of active community groups that's fighting these projects is really rising now, and the community groups have doubled to more than 800, spread nearly across every state over the last year. A national poll recently found that 7 in 10 Americans oppose having an AI data center built in their own community, and many cities from Denver to Seattle have passed pauses. One state legislator passed a moratorium bill, and a striking number of these fights in places like Georgia, Arizona, Texas are at core about water. More than 40% of America's data centers sit on areas that are already short on water. So let me bring this home for people who are out there doing actually caregiving, because the theory only matters if you change what you do. And I want to talk about practical steps to protect your family, whether or not this data center and water theory proves to. On food, I've shared rules in the last 2 videos, and they still hold. Cook everything if possible. Wash all produce under running water. Understand that washing alone will not reliably remove Cyclospora. During an active outbreak, favor whole heads of lettuce over bagged mixes. When in doubt, just cook everything. Heat to about 158 degrees. That's the only reliable thing that kills this parasite. Chlorine doesn't. Freezing doesn't. Heat will. 2 on water. Kind of know your surroundings. That purple-colored pipe near you that sometimes you see at parks, golf courses. Purple means reclaimed non-potable water might be safe for intended use, but never for drinking, and worth steering, little ones and pets away from that direct spray. If you live near, heavy new construction or a facility that's drawing on local water and you're caring for someone that's immunocompromised, you may want to consider keeping bottled or filtered water on hand just for peace of mind. Third, if you get this and diarrhea drags on for more than a few days or keeps relapsing, go to your doctor and just say Cyclospora and ask them specifically for a test, because standard stool tests will miss it completely. And watch for the real enemy if you're caring for an older adult: dehydration, dizziness, dry mouth, dark urine, confusion. Don't wait it out in someone that's frail, and a bunch of free resources. We never sponsor anything. The CDC and FDA websites, use those for rarefied outbreaks. Foodsafety.gov for food recalls. DPA safe drinking water pages for anything water-related. 211, you can get local help, and National Elder Care Locator. Just keep that resource on your fridge. That connects your family to local resources or your area agency on aging for help with meals and in-home support. I want to leave you here, just with an image here. A couple 100 years ago, this guy John Snow, standing over a map in London of a neighborhood of people that was dying, followed the water when everyone told him it was in the air and reached out and removed the handle from a single pump. He couldn't even see the enemy, but he didn't need to. He was just paying attention to the pattern, acted, and saved a ton of people. I think that is just really interesting, and that's our job. We are living through the largest build-out of water and power-hungry machines in human history that are plugged straight into the shared system that all of our health quietly depends on. People haven't proved that those machines are spreading this disease, but I think the smart move, the John Snow move, is not to panic, but it's also not to look away. It's just to pay attention, think, ask questions. Think about check on people who might be too proud or too tired to check on themselves. Advocate, you now may hopefully understand your water and your food better than almost anyone you know. So please do 2 things to keep this work alive and keep our community safe. Subscribe so the next briefing hits you, and share this with one person you know. An aging parent, a neighbor, a friend who's going through cancer treatment, whose body may not be able to take a hit right now. Even if the big institutions are too slow to protect us, we can still watch out for each other. I think that's what our community really does. I'm Dr. Thomas. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, and I'll see you in the next one.